All right, so do we have people here?
We do.
Okay, welcome everyone. I think we're going to just start because we've been recording, which I hope Mike edits out. I hope that you are at the session you want to be. This is about the CITES Framework, which is implementing leadership practices for an inclusive technology system. And just a shout out to Mike Murata for inviting me to present at this conference. I'm so excited to be here. I'm excited that you're here, and I hope that some of this information resonates with you and that you become part of the CITES team and part of the CITES network that we're trying to build. So as we get started, for those of you who like to follow along with the PowerPoint slides on your own, there's a bit.ly link to the slides, which is bit.ly/CITES-NJ, and that's capitalized, CITES New Jersey for the slides. And actually I will oops, I was going to try to put them in the chat, but I think I can't multitask like that. So the second slide is the handout, which has every link that you will see in this presentation. And that bit.ly link is bit.ly/CITES-NJ capitalized -H handout. So capital H, lowercase ANDOUT. And don't worry if you didn't grab these, we'll get them at the end too, but I'll give you a second to grab the bit.ly link if you would like. Okay, and don't panic if you don't have it. I'm going to stay until everyone has what they need. So to set the stage for our conversation, we like to start with a quote. And this is one of my favorites because I feel like it really encapsulates what this project is about, which is systems change. And that is sometimes difficult and sometimes hard and sometimes feels so big that you don't really start the process because it feels like a mountain in front of you. So Arthur Ashe was a famous tennis player, and he said, start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And I like this motto because it is the CITES motto. There's a lot of work here to do. It can take multi-years. It's a really big systems change idea, but that doesn't mean you don't start. You have a lot of the tools already, and you make that first movement and do what you can. So let's use that as our guiding principle as you hear about the CITES framework and inclusive technology systems. A little bit about me. I am a senior technical assistance specialist at CAST, and I am the project director on the Center on Inclusive Technology and Education Systems, CITES, and that is a CAST project as well. My contact information is on the screen, so I encourage you to reach out to me at jpeters@cast.org if you have questions after this session or just want to connect. I'm also learning Twitter, and I will just again do another shout out to Mike Murata, who has been a mentor in the Twitter universe for me, because I'm fairly new to that platform, and he's really helped me see it as helped me along to learn it, and also helped me see it as a valuable place. And he has some links, I'm sure, on his website for Twitter chats that he's involved with. So keep in contact with me and ask me questions. What we are going to do today, here's our agenda, and I'm going to introduce you to the CITES project. Maybe you are already familiar with CITES and CAST and the CITES framework, but if not, we'll just have a second to get an overview of CITES and the framework. We're specifically going to dive into leadership practices. So what has to happen for inclusive technology at that leadership level, which is really where you need to start or at least start making impact with leadership. I'm going to show you the CITES website and some of the resources and tools we have on that website for you to use and to begin this process. And throughout this, we'll have some interactions of where you see yourself and what first steps you might make. So please, I do have the chat open. Feel free to put in any information or questions in the chat, or just thoughts, concerns. Let's make it this session as interactive as possible. Okay, so here we go. Let's talk a little bit about CITES. So as mentioned, CITES is the Center on Inclusive Technology and Education Systems. We are an OSEP funded grant, and we're in the category of technical assistance. So we are trying to provide training and resources and technical assistance to the wider field. The overarching goal of our project is to increase the effective use of assistive technology, education technology, and information technology by students with disabilities and their families. We are doing that by building the capacity of school districts to implement comprehensive and sustainable technology ecosystems, where those three technology systems of AT, EdTech, and InfoTech work together for the benefit of students with disabilities, which, when that happens, is the benefit of all students. So those are our big, that's our big goal at CITES in this 5-year project. I like to put this slide in because it's a very technical project. We're talking a lot of tech, a lot of standards, a lot of criteria, a lot of guidelines that are technical of nature, but at the center of the CITES work are families. The reason we are doing this is for students with disabilities to really have full and effective learning and options in life. And so we put the students, the parents, the caregivers, however you define family, at the center of the work. They're a big component of our work. We do feedback loops. We have teams where parents give us feedback. We're connected with the Parent Training and Information Center network nationally. And so I just really like to emphasize that we keep this in mind, that families are the center, and we take that commitment very seriously with all of our products and tools. So the way we are trying to reach those big lofty goals of a system of AT and EdTech and InfoTech working together is by developing a framework. So the CITES framework is being developed, so we're creating it. We're creating it in 3 phases. So we started with leadership, and while we continue to iterate and incorporate what we learn, we have some tools and products ready in the leadership area, and that's why we're focusing on leadership today. Currently, we are in the process of creating the instruction area practices, and those include evidence-based practices for teaching, learning, and assessment make up our instructional phase. And then the final phase of this grant will be family engagement and really trying to capture what it takes to have families and students deeply engaged in technology initiatives in districts. So we're building this framework. We work with a couple of different sets of districts. So we have what's called our knowledge development districts. They're not on the slide, but I like to put a shout out to them anyway. These are districts around the country that have had some success in this inclusive technology model. And we interview them and we learn from them what aspects of inclusive technology need to be there at the district level. And they provide us with case stories, critical feedback, and they're really involved in the framework development. But our long-term districts are called framework development districts. And these 7 districts that are listed on this slide really co-develop with us. So we create a model and we have the evidence-based practices. And then these 7 districts across the country actually take a self-assessment, create goals, use the evidence-based practices, and do this work. So they're testing it and we're monitoring it. Does that increase the inclusive technology system in their district? These districts have made a 4-year commitment with us, and they're basically co-developing the CITES framework with us. And we're just so we're so impressed with what they're doing, and especially through the COVID pandemic and the commitment they have to this work. And we're learning so much about what works and then the barriers to beginning and doing this work in a district. So I'm going to pause there before we go to the next section and give everybody a chance to ask a question or share a thought. And I'm wondering, you can just say yes or no in the chat. Had you heard of CITES, the Center on Inclusive Technology and Education Systems, before this presentation. So let me know if this is new information to you or if you've heard of our center. I'll give people a second to type in the chat. Thanks, Lori. Glad to hear about the center. New. Okay. Thanks, Colleen. Thanks, Melinda. Okay, good. So we have some new, hopefully by the end of this session, some new converts. And I'm glad you're here and I'm glad it's new information for you. All right, so let's jump into the next section of why we do this work, right? This is one of the things that came back. We just recently did a quality panel on our website and had some people give us some feedback and review of our website resources. And people were overall really happy with what we have to offer. But one of the comments was, why do we do this? Like, why would we care to create an inclusive technology system? What's the point? So I added that to this presentation because I think if you're new to CITES or you're new to any of this kind of thinking, it might not be as obvious at first. So I created this little word cloud, and this is a true to data word cloud of the application from our 7 framework development districts. I went back to their application, and it was a really comprehensive application. And there was a question that said, why do you want to be part of the CITES, the CITES, project? And their answers were varied, but mostly had to do with equity, that we want students with disabilities to have equal access. We want assistive technology to work better in our schools. Some were about efficiency between these departments, like that seem to work great in silos, but not really comprehensively together. To be, have the data to go with it, to back technology purchases and the efficacy of technology. Efficiency came up a lot. And so those were some of the ideas that our framework development district shared with us, is that they just wanted things to work better and in a more equitable way. And logically, it seemed like if assistive technology and education technology and information technology work together, then these things like engagement and equity and efficiency would by nature improve. And we believe that too. And we're now getting data and evidence that supports that. For example, and I see Lori has put a comment in the chat that, has COVID shattered the barriers to students taking AT home from the school to use for their studies? And yes and no, it kind of depends on where. And I do think COVID has had, for our project, we started in February of 2020, essentially with our framework districts. And then, as we all know, March 2020, we had, by then we were knee deep in COVID, and it shifted everything. The exciting part for me was that the CITES framework and this work actually helped those districts, helped the districts we were specifically working with weather that storm a little bit better, because by virtue of this really complicated application, districts had already broken down some of those barriers. AT was already talking to EdTech because they had to apply. So I think, Lori, in response, in some cases, yes, I think districts have responded to COVID in a way that is pro collaboration and pro coordination between systems. Not everywhere, but I think COVID did lay bare that this is no longer an optional system, right? That these systems absolutely have to work together and be coordinated in their services. On the screen right now, you'll see one of our case stories from one of our knowledge development districts, and that's Tomball Independent School District in Texas. And we interviewed them prior to COVID, and they had a strong collaborative integrated AT and EdTech system. So they had already been training general ed teachers and special ed teachers together with all technology deployments. general ed teachers had specific information about how to work with students who used assistive technology in their classroom. So they already had a lot of good practices in place, which is why they were a knowledge development district and why we highlighted them. By the time we wrote this case story, however, what we learned was that having those practices in place and already having a leadership mindset of inclusion and true inclusion, where people are really have some power and representation on decision-making teams, because they were working towards that already. When COVID hit, they were able, wasn't perfect, you know, they don't claim nothing went wrong during COVID, but because they had those systems, they really credited that integrated system with how they were able to quickly and efficiently pivot in the COVID times. So I think this case story is really to that point of that Lori made in the chat of like, I think doing this work is preparing for the uncertainty of the future, and that breaking down those silos in districts will make a district more able to weather the storms that will come, both with COVID and whatever else is coming that we can't see. So I would really recommend reading this case story, because I think it's an inspirational, plus there's a lot of specific assistive technology things they did with G Suites, and they have these tutorials that they integrated into their EdTech site and not on a separate assistive technology site, which worked really well. So I would recommend taking a look at that. It's got some good inspiration and some good practical guidance for people doing assistive technology in districts. So let's take a second and pause and reflect. What do you think about inclusive technology systems, and why do you think they're important? So if you think they're, I mean, I'm making some assumptions that you do think they're important, but if you don't, I'd like to hear that too. So what's important about this systems thinking, you know, with technology specifically? And put it in the chat what you think. I'll give people a second to type and compose their thoughts. And if you do think it's important, what do you think your next steps or role, like why would you begin this work? What would be important in your setting to think about this work? Thank you, Melinda. Everything about this is important. I agree. I am if my passion isn't coming through, I will just state it explicitly. I believe this changes people's lives. I think that we can do AT, which we absolutely should do, and really focus on individual solutions, but simultaneously the systems change is what I think moves that needle. But anyone else have some thoughts about this? I'm monitoring the chat. Of course, it keeps disappearing. And as you're all typing, a second follow-up question in this pause and reflect would also be, do you see this work being done in your settings? And if so, give me a little explanation. And if not, what do you think the barriers, what barriers do you see to implementing inclusive technology systems? And I'm very comfortable with long drawn out pauses. So I'll give you time to type. Get a couple more comments going on in the chat. So Melinda says funding, and I do think funding, because funding for different technology systems comes from different sources with different requirements around those sources. And I do think that that's one of the challenges, but we do have some examples on our website of braided funding, where systems have been able to work together and still meet the letter of the law and the requirements of their funding sources, especially in small small schools with small budgets, they're doing a lot. That infrastructure with Wi-Fi, right? You know, we have, I think that the EdTech and AT worlds are working pretty well together, but InfoTech seems to be on their own, you know, on their own trajectory. And that's some of those basic things like Wi-Fi access, or being able to have a system that allows you to turn on the accessibility features and not have it so locked down. So those are all could be barriers, but also important things to think about with the system. Okay, if things come to you as you are watching the rest of this presentation, please put them in the chat and we'll continue the conversation. All right, so let's jump into the CITES framework for just a second. So I mentioned that the CITES framework is how we are reaching those big goals of a coordinated system and building capacity in districts. The CITES framework has 5 categories: leadership, infrastructure, teaching, learning, and assessment. And we started the framework using the National Education Technology Plan as a foundation. So if you aren't familiar with the National Education Technology Plan, it's a really good resource for thinking about how technology works in a district. It does some stuff really well. It has some inspirational stories. It lays out kind of big picture thinking about technology. What it doesn't, and it mentions accessibility, it mentions assistive technology, and it mentions universal design for learning. What the NETP doesn't do, however, is tell a district how to really go about any of that work. So the history of CITES is we started with that as a foundational piece because it's put out by the US Department of Education, Office of Technology. Many districts have adopted it. Many states have used it in their state technology plans. So it's well known and supported, but it doesn't give districts a lot of how-tos, right? It gives a lot of shoulds. You should do this, you should think about that. And we really wanted the CITES framework to be the, okay, we're thinking about it, but how do we go about this work? So we use the same categories, we use some of the same big thinking and rationale around those categories, but at the CITES framework, we really try as hard as we can to get down to that the how-to level. So as we are creating, as I said, we create this framework in phases, and the leadership, the work that goes into creating the phase and the practices are, we do a literature review, a landscape analysis. So this framework is research-based and is grounded in the best practices we know currently with the research, and they support the practices that we've identified. We do these in-depth surveys and interviews with knowledge development districts to make sure that we have the research base, but that we have some practical examples of that we don't have that research to practice gap where, yeah, the research says to do this, but we have no examples of anyone ever being able to accomplish that. So that's the function of those knowledge development districts. And then, as I mentioned, we cycle that in with our framework development districts and field test everything we're doing, and then make iterations with that. The leadership practices for the CITES framework include create a community-wide vision and align goals, develop a strategic technology implementation plan, measure progress for continuous improvement, develop clear outcomes for professional learning, and then take ownership of infrastructure development. And these are the big picture practices. And then under each of those, we have specific steps that a district would take. So I see another chat. Let's pause right here. And before we get into how would you begin this work? So Lori says students with disabilities need to develop the skill sets needed to enter competitive employment. We all use AT. It's so true. Word prediction every day. IT is good to see apps for accessibility are impeded in popular software. And I do think how I'm reading your comment, Laurie, is we're seeing a convergence really of assistive technology and regular technology. And it's been happening since the 90s, right? These systems used to be completely separate. Like if you were doing assistive technology, it would be nowhere in the mainstream, and the mainstream would nowhere be able to support or integrate AT. We've seen a convergence of technology, and that's a good thing for individuals with disabilities. The more universal design that is in things like a smartphone, the less specialized technology an individual would need for some special needs. The ideal is that these technologies are flexible, universally designed, and can be used by a much wider range of people. Assistive technology will always exist because those margins are, the people at the end of the margin who have very complex needs will always probably need some specialized tool. But the ideal, if you're creating accessibly from the beginning, then that assistive technology, when needed, it will integrate more with the regular technology. So yeah, that's what I thought, embedded into the popular software. So I think making a case for those universal design features, but also understanding how any specialized technology needs to work within that system. Okay, that was a slight tangent. Sorry. Okay, so how do you do this work? Let's start where you're at. And I will just be very honest. It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes collaboration. These are big issues. They're systems issues, and they are more they're more complex than just writing a vision statement that says we believe in inclusion or saying we support the assistive technology department. To really have that kind of inclusive system that breaks down those silos, it takes top-down administrative support. Someone at the top has to say, this is how we do business. And then it takes people who represent different areas really having the skills and knowledge and the leadership to make that change. So it takes the shared vision, and that takes everyone's voice at the table in an effective way. And it also takes champions that push that limit. And then there's bullet point is not on here, but I would say it goes from that to actually codifying that in some kind of system. So we've all seen experiences where there's a champion and maybe there's a commitment to the vision, but that champion leaves and the whole thing falls apart in a district. And now we're about social emotional learning, or we now care about something else. And so the third part of this is it takes those things, and then it needs to be the culture, right? And that is both the formal culture in written policies and guidelines and the technology plan, but also the informal culture of this is we include all students and our technology is available to all students and we make it work. So it takes all of that, and it takes a long time to do that kind of systems change. So the next slide is, well, okay, it takes a long time. It's hard work. It's worth it. It changes lives. What are some of the foundational questions to consider as you jump into this work? And these are from our framework field guide, which I'm going to demonstrate in a second. And so some of these, if you are in your sphere of influence to start thinking about, these might be questions you go to key people in your organization and say, okay, I think this work is important. Let's have a conversation. And these are some questions to think about. So does the district have a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion? So is there some kind of statement in either in the mission or the vision, or the school board has approved that commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion? And that is important because this is this work falls squarely in equity and inclusion. And this is, again, similar to the NETP. This is the how-to, right? Like you have this commitment, but how do you do equity? How do you make sure your school's inclusive? Here's the roadmap to do that. Secondly, now, because this is coming from the technology systems, does your district have a technology plan? And if it does have a technology plan, has anyone looked at it? In many districts, there might be a technology plan and only a handful of a committee that made it, and it's posted in some dusty corner on the website, and it's not a living, usable document. So Do you have a technology plan? Is it a real plan that's a roadmap that people look to make decisions around technology? Or do you need to, is that part of this work of like, how do we make a plan that is useful to the district to have inclusive technology? And the final question, is your district able to create this team, this leadership team that would be able to do this? The implementation science around these kinds of initiatives that take, 5 or more years to really implement has very key drivers in implementation science on what is necessary to create systems change. And that holds true for technology systems change as well. And one of the key factors is this leadership team who has this commitment, who has a plan, are they empowered by administration to make these decisions? Many times we form committees, we form groups, we talk about that, but those groups have great recommendations, but they have no power and they have no administrative support to go the next level of implementation. So these are some of the foundational questions, and I'd like you to put some thoughts about any one of those questions into the chat. Like, do you have, and when I say district, CITES is focused on districts, but I do think this work could work in other organizations as well. So I'll give you a second. Take a minute and try to answer one of these questions. Do you have a tech plan? Is it a good tech plan? Do you have a commitment in statement or in culture? And then who's the leadership team? And are they empowered to do this work? So give people a second to type in the chat. The thing with these Zoom meetings is I can't stop talking because I'm looking into the void, but maybe you're like me and you can't type when someone's talking at you. All right, Melinda, something that I think we need to explore. Excellent. Can I ask if you are at a district or a nonprofit or an organization? Anyone else have some thoughts about these foundational questions in your own setting? Okay, so another state AT program, we have many sites across the state. Excellent. You can certainly take this as a train the trainer and use it with your sites. National Disability Institute is urging financial institutions to ensure all services reports and investment reports are accessible. Yes, so accessibility is a big part of that. But what we've learned with accessibility, it's very hard to just go in and make accessibility the thing. I mean, you can and you should, but this kind of framework that we're doing at CITES goes up a level to ensure that accessibility is in that context of DEI and inclusion, and accessibility is the how you come to that question. So I think, Lori, thank you for that comment, because I think more and more institutions are requiring accessibility, but when the requirement is good, but it's really hard to have that coordinated system that really consistently provides accessible materials, reports, and websites without kind of backing up and going, well, what are the systems that, how do we produce any report? How do we produce those things and not embedding this work into those already existing systems? And Melinda, you're sharing that you work with schools. This stuff is all under Creative Commons license as an OSEP funded grant. And so I encourage you to use it, adapt it, just, use the adapted by and the Creative Commons license for that. But use this in your setting as you see fit. Okay, so let's jump into some of the tools that we have to share. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second and try to find the website. So thank you for your patience with my technology skills. Okay. And you've all disappeared, so let's go back. All right, so two things. I want to demonstrate the website. I hope you are now seeing the website. If someone could give me a thumbs up in the chat, that would be helpful. Okay, I'm going forward, assuming you're seeing what I'm seeing on the website. Oh, thank you, Lori. All right, so we've been talking about our CITES framework, and the framework is seamlessly integrated into our website. So you see we have leadership, infrastructure, teaching, learning, and assessment, and then of course more, because there's always more information to have. But essentially this is our CITES framework here. We have been working on leadership, and I would say leadership is the most robust section of our website because we have gone through the phase process to develop it. It has each of our practices. Every page has a training video. So we have the overview. So if you're just starting, this will give you information of what to expect from this leadership section. We have a self-assessment. So there is a self-assessment tool that once you understand what the leadership section is about, you can take a self-assessment tool to create a baseline of data of where your organization is in the process. And then, as I highlighted Tombal's story, here it is. We have our weaved throughout the site case stories and vignettes that support the area you're on. So let's just go to one of the practices. Create a vision, a community-wide vision, and align goals. There are subpoints. So in order to do that, we have a little detail of what you would do to create this community-wide vision and align goals, a training video, an assessment, again, just on this specific area of what it takes to create a community-wide vision and align goals in the CITES thinking, right? So this is all about that inclusive technology system. So that's what the assessment will be about. We provide resources that are supportive of that. And as I mentioned, the case stories or vignettes and supporting research. So the structure is the same throughout every practice. And there's information, in a similar way with resources, stories, and supporting research. This is all available as well on our resource page. So we have a framework field guide for leadership. So all of the information is integrated into our website, or if you're using this as a train the trainer model, or you want to go through it with your district in a more systematic way, this field guide is a downloadable PDF that's accessible and fillable. And it will walk you through each practice, how to use it, and have places where you input that data so that you can print it out later with connections. So it's the same information, which I know, but this is the field guide because it's like a workbook to really go through step by step, and then as well as the self-assessment. So those two tools, I think just the website in general, as well as going to this field guide that is a more, you've got a team and you're ready to walk through this process, the downloadable PDF can be helpful with that. These tools also have this supporting rationale, I guess. So this is a series of articles we've written about what leaders need to know about inclusive technology systems. First, from the district leader perspective. So if you're a district leader, what do you need to think about this? If you're an AT leader, where's your thinking need to be on this? And what do you need to know about InfoTech and EdTech, and what districts need to know? So as opposed to, these aren't AT competencies, these are more like, what does an AT person need to know to be effective in an inclusive system? And then what EdTech leaders need to know about inclusive systems, like how do you purchase EdTech that will work with the AT, things like that. So all of that is available on our website, and you can go explore some of those resources. All right, so let's see if I'm able to actually stop sharing for a second and go back to the slideshow. Thank you everyone for these your patience getting to the slide. Okay. Okay, again, I hope I am sharing the slideshow. I am trying to. So we have the leadership guide as well as the, are we seeing the slides now? Little confirmation. Okay, I can't tell if you're all seeing it, but I hope so. Okay, thank you, Lori. It's so hard to know on Zoom where you're at. So we're kind of coming close to the end, and I wanted to, I think the website is a great place. That downloadable PDF guide, we'll go back to that, make sure you have the links to the handout and the slides with all of this information. I wanted to highlight one more thing that I think would be particularly interesting to this group, is that CITES is creating a community of practice to support inclusive technology systems. So if you know what community practices are, we're creating a professional network of people interested in this work, committed and doing this work in some capacity, so that we all support each other. We will have quarterly meetings that you can sign up for, and you can decline anyone you want, or you can decline them all and get off the list at any time. But the quarterly meetings are going to be open to people who sign up and who are interested in this work. In between times, because quarterly, it's very frequent, or it could be a long time, right? If you haven't just-in-time need. We also have created, as part of this community of practice, a Slack channel where we can do some quick messaging to the group. And our framework development districts, so we already have about 100 members of those, are on there to offer support, and because they've been going through this framework process development and implementing it. So they're there to help anyone who's new to it and give them advice. The community of practice is free, and there's a link in the slide deck to sign up for that. So if this information is of interest to you, I would say join us and be part of this community of practice to move this work forward. And I think I just have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to open it up to any final questions. And thank you. I will, I think at this point I'll stop sharing so that I can grab the links and put them in the chat, just so I'm sure you have the slides and the handouts where you can get all of the field guide, the sign up for the community of practice, all of that is in the handout and in the slides. So just to make that available to you. Okay, and is there any final questions? Because I think if not, I will. Thank you, everyone. I know it's hard to just keep going on Zoom, but you all were really engaged, and I really appreciate that. I'll put my email in the chat as well. And I think if I'm not seeing any further ado, I know Mike will come in and stop it, but I think we, okay, Mike, I don't know how to end it.
I heard with half an ear if there's nothing else, and then I turned.
Yep, so I think we're good. What a great group, good comments, good engagement, and I really appreciate everyone's attention. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. I appreciate it. Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone, and have a great weekend.
Yes, you
Bye.
too. See you.
Thank you,
Bye,
Mike.
Jen.
Okay.
Thanks.